Welcome to today's talk. I'm Peter Nelson. I'm chair of the Joseph A. Myers Center for Research on Native American Issues and an assistant professor here at Berkeley in SBUM and Ethnic Studies. I'm also Coast Miwok and a tribal citizen of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. I'd like to ask you at this time to turn off all cell phones. We'll have a really engaging talk and we don't want that interrupted with devices. Really briefly, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement and start by acknowledging that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with the university values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university more accountable to the needs of Native American and Indigenous peoples. Today's event will delve more deeply into some of these issues raised by the land acknowledgement. And I also want to draw your attention to a report written by the Myers Center and Native American Student Development, NESD. This relates to the land grab or land grant universities or institutions. We have some flyers with QR codes to the report, which is free to download, so you can look at those later if you haven't taken a look already. All right, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for this event. Those are Native American Student Development and the Native American Thriving Initiative. We're also pleased to hold this event at the Native Community Center. And I want to thank Kenosha Bowerly and other staff and students for all the work that they've done to make today's event possible. I would also like to thank the staff of the Myers Center and the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues for their assistance with today's event as well. Deborah, Max, Lucine, and Katie. Today's talk is going to be Taylor Pennewell, who will lead a presentation for about 45 minutes. Then we'll have time for a Q&A. It's going to be a workshop style, so that's why we have the tables set up for you. And for those of you joining via Zoom, please use the Q&A feature to write your questions, and we'll also have an option for joining breakout rooms for you as well to participate in the workshopping portion of the talk. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Taylor Pennewell, the co-founder and executive director of Redbud Resource Group. She is also a tribal member at Berry Creek Rancheria Band of Maidu Indians of California and a forever student of her culture and community. Please join me in welcoming Taylor Pennewell.
Hi everyone, I'm gonna take this off this, I don't like standing behind the podium. And like Professor Nelson said, it's gonna be a pretty interactive workshop today. Not big on lecturing, I'm gonna talk a little bit, but I really want this to be as interactive and engaging as possible. So today we are gonna learn a little bit about land back, and we're going to do so through a tool that our organization, Redbud Resource Group, created that helps tribes and land-owning institutions think about what's possible with land back and to challenge the idea that land back is just a zero-sum game, that it's either like the tribe owns all the land or it owns none of it. We all know as tribal people that our tribes have really vast levels of capacity that allow us to own land or to not own land. And so we don't want to get stuck in some of those capacity issues, and we want to start getting creative and thinking about solutions of how to overcome barriers to land back. All right, here we go. Click on this. Okay, so that's me. Like Dr. Nelson said, my name's Taylor. You can call me Taylor. the co-founder of Redbud Resource Group and child member Berry Creek Rancheria. I'm also Imani's like third cousin, I believe. I haven't done the math, but it's pretty close. So happy to be here, excited. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what Redbud does, so you're familiar with the organization. I also have some really cool opportunities for you to get involved if you're interested. So we're a Native American nonprofit, education nonprofit that's focused on improving public health outcomes for Native people through education, research, and community partnerships. And we really focus on building the capacity of our tribes to step up into leadership positions in a variety of areas. We really focus in on public health, conservation, environmental stewardship, and K-12 education. We have a variety of programs, one of which I'll show you in a moment, that is focused on building leadership skills within tribal communities and also helping give tribal people connections between one another that are healthy so that we can lead our communities in a sustainable way. And then, of course, we are interested in creating thriving, healthy Indigenous ecosystems. Like I said, we really work in 3 different areas. Public health. So we have a program that's directed for doctors in Indian health clinics to help them think about some of the culture specificities in how to treat tribal communities and also how to collect data and what to do with that data and how to use it in an ethical way. We work in the education space. We do a lot of curriculum development at the state and national level. Poppy's familiar with the Gold Rush curriculum that we produce for the state that is on the California Indian genocide. And so it falls under genocide studies. It's available on our website, redbudresourcegroup.org. We also train K-12 teachers on how to implement Indigenous curriculum. We also recently did a really cool research project with the Lawrence Hall Sciences that was asking the question, can TEK be integrated into K-12 science classrooms in an ethical way? The answer might be no, but we wanted to ask it anyway. So we're going to continue doing work around that. And then lastly, tribal capacity and tribal relations, capacity building. We work with tribes to help them build their capacity to advocate for themselves, to lead, to receive land back, steward, etc. But we also work with non-tribal institutions in a big way. Basically, we realized that we have to do both. We have to do both. It can't just be giving our tribes, questions to ask, goals to seek, whatever. So much of the challenges that we have with our tribes is learning how to work with institutions who don't really respect or acknowledge us in any real way. And so we spend a lot of time on, I'm not going to say cultural competency trainings, but tribal relations strategy trainings and programs with non-tribal institutions. So this is the program I'm really excited to share with you, and I hope that some of you sign up. It's called Restoring Right Relations, and it is a long-form leadership program for folks like yourselves. It's perfect for people in your age group and at your stage in career. But basically, we have a cohort of about 20 to 25 intertribal California, mostly California natives, some folks out of the state, people who come together for 9 months, and we do leadership workshops, strategic planning workshops, and the most fun part is we get out on the land. We go on 4 multi-day trips to specific tribal territories around the state, where we learn about how are they actually taking theory and applying it to their tribal territories. So you'll get to learn about how do the mechanisms of land back actually work with people? Where do you get the money? Who manages the money? How do you pay people? What is the benefit from a cultural and wellness perspective on the community? Also, what are some of the real challenges that we experience in real life? You're gonna get all of that. You're also gonna gain lifelong friends. We have a focus on wellness. It's all trauma informed as well. And so we find that often people who engage in this program leave with some real tools that they can take back to their families who maybe are still having challenges with some of the ongoing effects of colonization, and they have some new tools to share with their families to bring collective healing. So that right there is a QR code. It goes to our website. It doesn't go to the application, but once you're on the website, you can go to the menu and there'll be a drop down that says restoring right relations, and the application just went live like 20 minutes ago. I got the text. This was their deadline. I was like, it has to be up before noon. So please sign up, and it's a lot of fun. Another program I wanted to share with you is the Feather River Advocacy Project. This is a similar tribal leadership program, but it's based on the Feather River and the tribes in the Feather River, one of which is our tribe. Very great. It's a lot of Maidu communities. But basically, the Feather River is one of the core rivers that feeds the whole state water project. And there's pretty much no water access for tribes in the area. There's no water rights for tribes in the area. We're still dealing with mining. We're still dealing with the impact of hydroelectric development in the region. And there's very, very, very little tribal engagement. And so the goal of this is to reconnect people with their ancestral place, with themselves, and also to reconnect us with some of our cultural practices as well, with the goal of coming up with a unified vision of what tribal engagement in water in California can look like. So I'm sharing this with you. If any of you are from the Feather River region, you are. So maybe you can sign up. This is a really cool program, but it just shows you a little bit of the kind of things that we do as an organization. We try to get off the computer as much as possible and see the field, because that's where the magic happens with tribal people. And then lastly, I mentioned that we work with non-tribal institutions all the time. This is a photo of some of the folks who represent 25 different institutions across the Bay Area that manage a lot of land and cultural resources. They've been with us for 3 years, building out tribal relations strategic plans, and also visiting tribal spaces in the Bay Area to build relationships. We've served in the Going Beyond Land Acknowledgement Right Relations program about 20,000 people from hundreds of institutions in the last couple of years. And as you might imagine, there's no cookie cutter way to do tribal relations and strategic planning, because every single tribe is a different entity, right? They all have their own issues and capacity and goals and things like that. So we never give anyone the answers for what to do with tribes. We just present ideas and questions that they need to ask if they want to work with tribes. So that is a little intro to Redbud, but we are not here to talk about that. We are going to talk about land return and land back spider. So the purpose of today is to assess forms of land back and reflect on options for strengthening relations to ancestral homelands. But first, I want to ask you all a question, and maybe folks in the workshop can add some notes in the comment or the chat or whatever it is that you have there, the Q&A bar. But I want to ask you, what is land back, in your opinion? Notice I said, like, in your opinion, so I'm asking for kind of a subjective answer. There's not a right answer here. Take a stab at it. What do you think it is? Or maybe like what words come to mind or something like that.
I should talk about the restoration of relationships to ancestral places.
Okay, so restoration of relationship. Anything else? Yeah.
So where that comes to mind is jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction, so there's like a legality around it. Okay. Those are two really different answers. Jurisdiction and relationship. Anything else?
Yeah, maybe the right to engage in traditional practices. Is that what you're hearing? So like cultural learning.
Yeah, so and then I heard like cultural practice, there's active culture, but there's also rights attached to it, protection of your ability to practice that culture. Those are two slightly different things, both super, super important, definitely part of land back. What about in a more like literal way? What does land back mean? Yes, Deb?
I just wanted to read a couple things.
Oh, sure.
In the Q&A. I'm trying to pass it over to Peter, but tribes being given access in a formal way to their lands, restoring unimpeded access to land and water, cultural traditions, some already mentioned in here, and reparations.
Good, okay. I like this because there's such a huge range. Like when we think of land back, literally, it's like the land is being given back. It's being put into trust, or the title is being transferred, right? We're thinking of it as super literal land ownership way. But that is only one level of what land back is. It is also protection and ability to practice culture. It is also reconnecting with your culture and your community and your ancestral place. It is all of these things at the same time. And I might add, when we only think of it in an ownership way, we kind of dip into like colonizer territory, right? Because we're thinking about ownership without thinking about why. What is the holistic and long-term impact of why we want a piece of land in our ownership? And so before we go even deeper into land backs, I'm going to show you a case study, and I'm going to ask you to tell me, is it land back or not, and why? Okay, I'm going to show you a couple slides to kind of set the context of how land was lost in the first place and what the impact is. I'll say during Native studies, you might have an even more complex and nuanced way to explain this than I do. Surely you do, because this is only like 5 slides. I'm going to give you a really, really, really big overview because we have other things that we want to jump into. So we might remember that pre-contact Native communities were super complex, sophisticated, and evolved in all of the ways. We had complex intertribal economies that allowed us to trade across vast distances across the entire continent and beyond. Through this trade, we were able to obviously exchange goods and foods and things like that, but also cultural knowledge, ceremonies, songs, practices, stories, right? And so these things have always been in place between our tribes. We also have evidence of mass eco-stewardship, especially when we look at, evidence of fire regimes and things like that. And Dr. Nelson is really the expert on this. And then we also had systems of diplomacy, systems that allowed us to maintain positive relationships between other tribes and other families. In the case of Maidu country, where I'm from, there's not a lot of evidence of like big violent battles or conflicts. Mostly there's evidence of, when we had a conflict, it'd be like, okay, we're gonna gamble it out. And it'd be like, we're gonna play hand games, and for weeks it could go on, right? And whoever the winner is, well, that's who was right, and you just have to accept it, right? That's what the creator wants, the natural order of things. And so we understood that, there are spiritual ways of practicing diplomacy that can help us maintain natural order of things, that we need to accept that. Now, of course, much of this changes during colonization. I have a little image here, a little infographic that I'm not going to go into large detail, but it's just to kind of remind us of what we've gone through as California Indian people. We have the Spanish era, Russian colonization, the Rancho era, and then we also have the period of really cultural assimilation, and that brings us into today, self-determination, sovereignty, and futurism. And there are many policies of colonization within this diagram. The beginning, we see many policies of physical genocide. We have the Act for Governance and Protection of Indians, right? California's first law that ushers in a period of state-sanctioned genocide and legalized slavery of California Indian people. We also have in the late 1900s policy of cultural genocide, right? Forced assimilation through the Indian boarding schools and things like that. We also have the weakening of tribal sovereignty with the Termination and Reorganization Act in the 50s. And then we're kind of in this period, we sometimes sadly joke that we're in like the best period of colonization right now because it's not outwardly violent against us, but we are in a position where we get to start thinking about how to strengthen our sovereignty and move into a period of strategic cultural revitalization. Unlike our grandparents, we are in a period where we can start bringing back language, bringing back ceremony in a relatively safe way, but it's not entirely safe. So we have to be cautious and careful and suspicious, but we can start to move in a positive direction. And it is that optimistic suspicion that I'm gonna ask you to adopt today when we look at land facts. As tribal people, we always gotta be a little suspicious of who we're working with. It's a part of being safe. So we're gonna practice that muscle. When we think about colonization, we think about land and, oh, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, just quickly on the last slide,
Yeah,
the allotment and assimilation just has a starting date, so that period is still ongoing. I wonder, is that a mistake?
well, yeah, I think it's referring to assimilation. The assimilation is kind of ongoing. There's not exactly an end period of assimilation. Yeah. These aren't policies. They're just kind of general eras. Yeah. We do have a policy guide though on our website if you want something more specific. Yeah, I could show that to you later. So when we think about colonization, well, basically at Redbud, like I said, we work with a lot of non-native people who are starting at square one with understanding colonization. And so we wanted to come up with a really, really simple infographic that could help us teach others. And so we came up with this, and as scholars, you can all complicate this diagram in many ways. You can add to it, you can move things around. I'm all about that. Everything is a living document, in my opinion, and you should edit things in a way that makes sense to you. But the way that I like to explain it is like this, that colonization is really about wanting land and resources, right? Colonization is about one entity taking over another entity to have access to its natural resources, to be able to extract them and then sell them off for profit or use them for profit. That's the way I understand it on a very, very simple level. The problem for people, settlers who moved into this region and wanted those natural resources for that profit was that this was a super populated place. Maybe over 1 million people, right, from many different tribal areas lived in California at the point of contact, which meant that many of the natural resources that people wanted to extract, well, they were in heavily populated areas, especially when you go up into the mountains. And so this is where we see early policies of genocide. The strategy to address the population issue is to erase the people physically. That's what comes first. And then comes the cultural genocide with the boarding schools at the end of the gold rush. This allows the government to step in and reduce tribal lands, and then implement land privatization due to the creation of public lands and national parks here as well. All of these policies open up land and resources for exploitation. And then of course, we know now what happens when you overexploit land. You have ecocide, the sister of genocide. They go together, right? You have extractive industry that goes unchecked. And then we have poor public health outcomes. Because when you don't have healthy air, when you don't have enough water for folks, everybody suffers. Not just native people, obviously native people and indigenous ecosystems, but non-native people who live here as well also feel the impacts. And so this is what I use to explain colonization to non-native people when we start doing tribal relations work. And I just wanted to share it with you in case it's helpful for you. Because as native people, you might find yourself in a teaching role pretty often, and it can be super, super exhausting. And so we like to help out by being like, this is the way I explain it. It's pretty simple, so that you can make it your own. To further solidify the impact of colonization, I have here a state map on the left. It's of tribal languages, and so it's not, it loosely corresponds with tribal territory, but you could see just how diverse the state was pre-contact. And then that map on the right is Rancherias. And you have to squint really hard because it's the yellow dots. Does anyone see a yellow dot from their table? Those are Rancheria lands. And so obviously a lot of land was lost. You can imagine what the impact would be on your spirit, on your physical body, on your sense of belonging, well-being, community, family structure, to go from knowing something like this to knowing something like that. It just obliterates your sense of reality in a way that makes it very, very hard to live sometimes, frankly, which gets us to the public health impact. Before I get to that, I want to just show you a little diagram to help emphasize the impact of that land loss. So I pulled some data from NOAA and Department of Fish and Wildlife here just to show some like estimated population impacts that correspond with timelines and policies. But you can see here that 1850 is kind of like the peak of the California Indian genocide. And the native population is this bright red line. Sorry if you can't see it, but you can see that it goes from estimated 1 million, drops straight down to about 20,000 in a couple of years. Okay. And then these other lines represent California indigenous species. So we can see the abalone population drops. The beaver population is almost exactly correspondent with the California Indian population drop. So we got the riparian habitat, so like floodplains. Grizzly bear population just goes straight off the map because they got hunted into extinction. And so I show this because when we're thinking about the impact of land loss and like that sense of belonging and worldview and connectedness and purpose, it's really deep. It's really deep because you're losing not only your place, but you're losing your friends. You're losing your relatives. And there's a lot of grief in that, right? That many of our communities don't know how to process, even to this day. Sometimes the best way to process is to assimilate. And that's often what happens. And so to wrap this up before I show, there's like one more sad slide, and then we're gonna go to half. So just stick with me. A quote that I like to share that really demonstrates this impact is here. It says, "You know, daughter, before the Spaniards came to California, the bears and us used to gather berries together. The bears were real friendly. We got along real well. We could talk to each other, and we had a good understanding. When the Spaniards came, they found it pretty easy to shoot the bears. After that, the bears wouldn't go berrying with us anymore." This quote always makes me tear up a little bit, but it's interesting because it shows like the dehumanization, right, of animal relatives, extractive mindsets, right? But you can compare that with the note about like we used to be friends. We used to be able to coexist and communicate and speak each other's language to make sure that we were living in balance with one another. And then the introduction of a different worldview came and shattered that, right? And so what does this do to a people? Some of you will probably know. So unfortunately, Native people, because of this ongoing legacy, experience some of the worst public health outcomes in the entire United States. Here's a couple examples, but it goes much deeper than this. 1 in 6 Native people struggle with diabetes. It's often called Indian disease, like that's what it was called in my grandma's day. And it is directly because we don't have access to our indigenous foods in Lifeways anymore. 1 in 15 Native people experience houselessness, sometimes and often on our own ancestral territory. We can't afford to have a house, have a home, or roof over our heads. 2 in 3 Native people report feeling erased from their school and community. So there's this feeling of being erased, of not having a sense of belonging, right? And you're lucky that you have this place, because I'll say I graduated college 10 years ago, and we had nothing like this. There was no community, Native community centers at universities at that time in this area. And it's directly addressing that, by the way. So all of these public health statistics lead to a decreased life expectancy. We live less by 5 to 7 years than any comparable group in the United States. And we also have a suicide rate of 25% in Native youth across the United States. It is directly correspondent to these, right? And it's directly correspondent to ongoing land loss, cultural loss, etc. And so the bomb to that, or one of the solutions to that, is land back. And so, I'm holding my thing. So what I want to do, we're going to shift tone now, he's gonna be happy from now on, is we're gonna look at land back from many, many different views. And we're gonna start thinking about land back, not just as something that feels good, that feels like the right thing to do. We're gonna start looking at land back as a public health intervention. That it is absolutely necessary to keep our people alive and to keep our people functioning. Okay, and so I want to show you a really positive case study, and this is from the Yurok tribe. We're going to watch this about a 4-minute video, and basically what happened is the Yurok tribe was able to get land transferred, the title transferred into their ownership, but as a part of the land transfer, they are also partnering with state parks and a couple other organizations to steward the land. I don't want to spoil it too much. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what they're going to be talking about here. But we're going to watch this. And then in your little groups, we're going to discuss the question, is this land back?
For the Yurok tribe and its people. You're in the ancestral territory of Today is a very special and important day for the Yurok tribe and its people. Today is a very special and important day for the Yurok tribe and its people. You're in the ancestral territory of the Yurok tribe. If you look around us, you have water, you have streams, you have otters work in the area. Then you look uphill, see the old growth redwoods. And so the hope is to make this place a gateway to all the beauty and into Redwood National and State Parks. There's trails here that connect us from the coast to inland. A lot of this area is well documented as Yurok ancestral territory. And we're very proud and honored here today, excited to sign an agreement with California State Parks, National Parks, and Save the Redwoods, transferring over 125 acres to our people to heal this land and restore it to Mother Earth.
Well, when I was younger here, this was all industrial, right? There was a big sawmill right here that was huge. And back when I worked here, this was kind of like a dirty place. Old growth logs would be piled, as high as those trees, and they had giant machines here, and this was just a noisy place. And so now, you hear the tranquility that's here right now. You always talk about it as, like a cut, right? This was a festering cut for us Yurok people. And now that all this is being restored, we're starting to heal that cut. And so hopefully we'll be back healthy again, make us whole once again.
We are here to celebrate the signing of a memorandum of understanding to advance a new vision for this place with co-management and perpetual conservation and public access, collaboratively managed by the Yurok tribe, the National Park Service, and California State Parks.
This is a model that doesn't currently exist, and it will have such a tremendous impact on the millions of visitors that come through here. The perspectives, the experiences that can be had by starting from a place of understanding Indigenous history and what true partnership in a region looks like to welcome people here.
The vision here has always really been to welcome visitors here, have interpretive trails. We're going to build a Yurok village here with plank houses, a sweat house, and have safe elk viewing where there's going to be trails that connect back into Lady Bird Johnson and tall groves around here, and it's going to be a really beautiful place. For me, it's also about welcoming our community back here. Both local communities and our tribal people who have been removed from this landscape, and really bringing them back here and allowing them to reconnect with this land and have a space just to be.
This is a first in the nation agreement where a nonprofit's transferring land to a tribe, and Parks, State and National, will co-manage the site with the tribe, with the league coordinating it on the property to do restoration work, reconnecting the floodplain we're standing in right now to Prairie Creek.
it will be great to have Yurok tribe and indigenous people orienting people for their traditional homelands. A place where folks can come and be able to take trails out to the coast or up to the redwoods. This will be a unique perspective on coming into this region and to bring balance back to these lands. It's special.
It's a proud day, and it should be. And again, it's a milestone for us collectively coming together with our partners here.
Where the redwoods grow.
Why is it land back? Try to think beyond just the ownership, like, you know, the ownership, not ownership dichotomy. Why is it land back? So talk for like 5 minutes and we'll come back together, okay? All right, thanks everyone for having that conversation. I heard someone just say this is a long conversation. Yes. That's the point. All right, I think I gotta like start this over here. So let's have a conversation about this as a group. If anyone has any thoughts that they think the whole group might benefit from hearing, feel free to share. I'm not using the mic anymore, by the way, because it was making weird sounds on the Zoom or something. So let me know if I need to speak up. But yeah, let's hear about it. Is this case study land back? What do we think? There's like no right or wrong answer, and you're gonna really see that when we get to the spider. So don't be scared. It's okay. There's no wrong answer. It's not a Berkeley class. Like there's no test at the end. Yeah.
I personally don't think so, just because it's signed via an MOU, which is just another form of an unratified treaty with a contemporary context, meaning that like these partnerships aren't going to last, or they're just loose handshakes.
Okay.
That the National Park Service or other words could take away over time, or like not provide the actual land, or even like, I don't know, community aspects or perspectives, or just like opportunities for tribal people to utilize the landscape and like something would happen over time.
Okay, that's the right kind of suspicion we want going into the spider grass. What else? Other thoughts? So she said no right away.
Sorry.
What's the counter? Are there any counters for that? Again, this is just a playing devil's advocate. How might it be land back? Should I call on someone? Yeah.
I guess according to almost all the definitions that we started with, it seems to count. Formal access to jurisdictions, restoration of relationships, cultural traditions, reparation, and then of course some level of ownership.
Okay. So it hits it in a couple ways, but we still have some questions about like, is this valid? Are we gonna be able to follow through with it? Is the deal strong enough to hold? But if it does hold, then it does kind of hit a lot of boxes. Any other thoughts on this? Questions? Ways that we're suspicious of what we just saw? Yeah.
We're talking about maybe the pros and cons of the co-management situation, where like with having the state and federal aspects of it and resources that come with that, definitely to fund some of the restoration that they're trying to do. But then in terms of like who has the ultimate decision-making power, that was the question we ended with. Yeah, especially if like they save the redwoods has a certain like goal of saving the redwoods, but then the tribe might want to clear an area for other reasons. So what happens?
Yeah, what happens when you have competing priorities, and who's going to have that decision-making power? That's really, really important. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so there's a comment from online. The video showed engagement, but Native people are only invited to share input instead of true and full leadership.
All right. And the question is, what would full and true leadership look like? Or maybe even like, what would this partnership look like if it was the tribe that was actually leading the negotiation of the deal and inviting the other partners in? once they already had their vision? Like, what would it look like if you reversed the roles? And what would it take for that to happen is another question. Like, what capacity does that tribe have to have in order to be able to come to the table from that position of power? And what kind of resources do they need to have, right? Where those resources come from? Are they reliable resources? So it starts to get complicated really, really quickly. But I can see that you're already approaching this from the perspective of someone who's negotiating on behalf of your tribe. Because in my mind, this is really an exercise in negotiating. How do you poke holes in an opportunity to make sure that your tribe can get the best deal and can also be protected, right, in all of the ways? And so I think that we're all ready to go into the spider graph. I'm gonna click on my slide. So you all have your packet. So on a really practical level, land back refers to a movement that calls for return of indigenous lands to indigenous people, right? This is what we're mostly familiar with. It seeks to address historical and ongoing injustices related to colonialism, land dispossession, violation of indigenous sovereignty and rights. And it also advocates for the restoration of land rights and empowerment of indigenous communities to steward our own ancestral lands. And as we've learned, it can be many, many, many things. That access and that ownership is just one part of it, but I think of it as the whole picture. That it's land back, but it's like culture back, it's community back, it's tribal identity back, right? And for me, that translates to things like food sovereignty for my tribe. Can we feed ourselves our ancestral foods from our ancestral lands? Looks like water protection. It looks like rights of nature. It looks like returning things like cultural burns, which my tribe is doing right now in Berry Creek on a piece of land back. So it can happen. Protection of sacred sites. And of course, land rematriation, which you've probably heard in this region a lot, right? From indigenous groups. What does it look like to approach this issue from a matriarchal perspective and all the implications that that carries with it? So that brings us to the spider graph. So basically, what I was finding, because I work with lots of tribes and land owning institutions across the state, and I was finding that there were a lot of well-meaning land owning institutions who wanted to engage in this land back movement, but were finding that they had their own barriers within their institutions, like maybe their funding source didn't allow them, or their status, right, didn't allow them to give land or sell land back to a tribe, or maybe their board wasn't into it, but people in different levels of the organization were interested, but they couldn't go through with it because the leadership wasn't on board, right? There's so many reasons that these institutions couldn't engage all the way. They couldn't go all the way, but they wanted to figure out how to engage in it. And then there were lots of tribes, on the other hand, who might not have been in the position to just buy a bunch of land. Like, they didn't have the capital. They didn't have the fundraising capacity to go get the money. When they got the land, they didn't have the capacity to do anything with it, so it was gonna end up being a liability. Maybe a tribe was being offered a piece of land that was not the best plot of land. Like, there's tons of stipulations attached to it, right? Like, no water rights. You can have the land, but no water. You can have the land, but you can't house your people on the land, right? All of these different barriers. And then we also have things like recognition status, right? That can also make it complicated. And so I was realizing that people like this land back thing, but there's way more barriers than there are entry points. And I wanted to create something that would help create more entry points so that the conversation could keep going and you didn't get stopped. And so that's why we created this land back spider. And so basically what it is it's kind of like a conversation tool or a communication tool. It can also be a strategic planning tool. But essentially what you do with it, we're going to practice it in a moment, is you take a case study, a situation that involves land and tribes and a landowning entity, and you would get super suspicious, just like you did, about 5 different categories: access, consultation, stewardship, leadership, and ownership. And you would look at a case and be like, okay, what's everything I know about access in this case? What information is missing? What questions do I need to ask? And then once you get all that info, you're just gonna grade it on a scale of 0 to 25. It's not technical, you just give it what you feel. And then what is gonna happen then is you're gonna end up with scores on all of these, and you're gonna see what, oopsies, what categories are not doing so well, and what categories might have room for potential. My favorite way to use this is to give it to a tribe and to give it to a landowning entity, have them grade themselves and come back and compare answers. And then get curious about all the discrepancies that they see. Because what happens every time is the landowner thinks they're doing awesome. And the tribe is like, what? And what that does though, is it maybe can create like a moment of humor and levity. But more importantly, it creates opportunities to continue the conversation. Like, why did you put access at 25 and I put it at 5? Like, what's going on there? And the beauty of it is it feels slightly less personal. There's like some psychology in this tool. It's slightly less personal because it's like, it's just the score. It's not you, it's just the score on the graph. So let's put our heads together and try to overcome this, right, for something better. And so we're gonna go ahead and practice this in a moment. Really quick, I'm gonna go through the definitions of these. It sounds like some of you are fairly familiar with this. Usually I do this with people who work in tribal relations, so they're like actively using these terms. If something's a little confusing to you, when we get into groups, raise your hand and I can come and clarify, okay? So consultation is something that is in many cases legally required of tribes, but basically it refers to a process of seeking advice, guidance, or expert opinions from individuals or professionals to make informed decisions or address specific concerns. So tribal consultation might be like, there's a new plot of land that the state is going to buy and turn into a state park, but there's a bunch of sites on cultural sites on that land, so it needs to contact the correct tribes and get input onto how to mitigate harm on those sites. That'd be tribal consultation. Okay. Stewardship refers to the responsible and ethical management, protection, and preservation of resources, assets, or interests for the benefit of current and future generations. Think of land stewardship, taking care of a piece of land. That looks really different from a tribal perspective and from a non-tribal because their goals are totally different. Leadership, ability to make decisions on behalf of a community, guiding collective action in upholding shared responsibilities and values. Leadership in a tribe could look like a tribal, from a tribal council, it could look from a committee in the tribe, it can look like the general council, like the whole population of the tribe, it could look like a group of elders, right? But then leadership in an institution is usually like a board or executives, could even be the voters, depending on what it is. Ownership, this is the easiest one, refers to the legal right to possess, control, and derive benefits from a specific property or asset. You own it, you get to decide what happens with it. So, wait, did I do access? Sorry, and access refers to the ability to enter, use, retrieve, or interact with something, such as information, resources, or physical space. So can you enter a piece of land or not? All right, so this is what we're gonna do, because this is the actual fun part here. So I'm gonna read a case study, and then I want you to work with your group to get super suspicious about the case study, poke holes in it, ask questions, list all the information that's missing, because there's a ton of information missing, and then you're gonna give it a score. The case study is score. You can decide what order you want to go in. You don't have to go in any specific order. It might be nonlinear, probably will be nonlinear. So basically the case study is, a state park has granted the local tribe access to park lands to host its annual Tule Boat Festival. The tribe is able to harvest tule on the park's lake throughout the year and may host a tule boat making workshop for tribal youth. There's a tribal member on the state park staff working in the education department. This is a case study that's just lifted from an actual thing that happened. I'm sure you can think of lots of other case studies that would work for this. So take your time in your groups. You can pick which category most interests you. And if you get really stuck, there is a little list of like assessment questions on the back, in case you get stuck and you're not really sure where to start, okay? But I want you to get really suspicious. You are trying to broker the best and safest deal for your tribe. You do not want someone taking advantage of your tribe, okay? So we'll come back in like 15 minutes or so. Alrighty, I'm excited because I've heard people I heard people being suspicious, which is good and asking all the right questions. I also heard people at the end start to talk about like, well, what would this look like if it was the ideal scenario? Like, how could we fix this? And that's really important that you're doing both at the same time, right? That you're like poking holes and getting suspicious and asking questions, but that you're also maintaining your sense of imagination and possibility and what can be, right? Because that's how we got to the land back movement in the first place, is that people knew that it was going to be really, really hard and that it would be an uphill battle, but they didn't lose sight of their imagination. So who wants to share with us some of their scores? How'd they do you, Money?
They can be pretty good. Access, we gave them like 7. Consultation, they did like maybe 5, probably a 0.
0, okay.
Stewardship, 5. Leadership, 5. Ownership, 0.
All right, so they have a lot of work to do. I think we could probably talk for hours about what's missing from the scenario for us to make an educated, score and all of that. But I'm more interested in what you think needs to be better about this. Like, what could be with this scenario? Was anything coming up for folks? What would you like this scenario to be? Short of like give all the land back and the tribe just has it, like be realistic here for a moment. It's state park land. What's the best scenario that we might be able to negotiate for ourselves? Yeah.
I'm wondering what that type of partnership would look like throughout like the year, like because I know it said it was like an annual festival, but also like what does that mean for trying to be able to have access like to all those materials like throughout the year? Like, would that mean there would be like someone from the park there, or like what does that then look like? Because then it can feel like someone's like encroaching on that type of space for them, but also like the maintenance and like upkeep of the ecosystem, like kind of. I'm thinking more about that as like it's not just one, like yes, it's an annual event, but also like there's more steps I feel like that can be on throughout the year.
Yeah, like you don't just come and gather acorns once a year and then go away and never come back, right? Have no relationship with that tree or whatever it is, right? That it has to be something that's ongoing, and then who's policing that? Like really, who gets access, who doesn't? People often come up with like, is it just this one specific tribe? And how do they monitor that? How do they determine who qualifies to get access? And that gets really messy, and you start to get the lateral violence, which gets really scary. And so it was a great question, Poppy. How do you negotiate an ongoing relationship? Yeah. What other thoughts came up for people?
We have some comments from online. So one is, how much say does the tribal people have? Be more transparent. And then a second comment is, I shared that state parks being more explicit with tribes. In this scenario, with year-round access, truly what year-round access really looks like versus just being treated like a vendor who is quote unquote accessing for a day event.
Yeah, very good. Any other questions, thoughts, things that were bothering us about the scenario before we move on?
Just the part about like the tribal member on the staff. That was what, like, why is that there?
Because they would think that's very important.
What's their involvement? What's their reporting structure?
Yeah, I had a conversation with a couple of folks about the consultation category in this case study, and that's actually exactly why that detail is what's in here, is because very often land institutions think that if there is a tribal person on the staff, that counts as tribal consultation, and we know that that's it's just legally not true, it's not true. So we put that in there so that it opens up a conversation about like, what do we mean when we say consultation? Can just having random Native people off the street come in count as consultation? Or does it have to be something more specific? And you would be shocked that people don't know what a more specific option is. And so it's really important that a tribe gets its ducks in a row and imagines, well, what does consultation mean for us as a tribe? So that then when you enter into the conversation with the potential partner, you know what you need, right? And we don't often have those conversations as tribes. They're often reactionary, like once something's already happened. And so doing this with your tribe is an opportunity to kind of get your own stuff together, right? So you know, this is what consultation means to us. This is what access means to us. You don't get to tell us what it is, we're gonna tell you what it is, and then figure out a negotiation from there. Oh, yes.
I have a question about kind of how to hold these two, like, there's two different perspectives here. I think on the spider graph, it's scoring really low, but we should still celebrate this because they're doing, I mean, this state park is doing a lot better than a lot of state parks. And so how do you, I don't know.
It's a morale question because it's like, yes, and there's always room to improve. So I think we just have to remind ourselves that we're basically starting at zero. Tribes are often starting at zero, and the institutions are starting at zero or below zero, right? And I think just maybe opening up the meeting with like, we know that we're all kind of at zero, and so we are going to celebrate even if you're at level 5. That's something, but there's so much further that we could go. And you have to just have that growth mindset going into it, and to reiterate that. And then I think that always acknowledging the work of your partners, Native or not Native. We work with a lot of non-tribal institutions, and they get just as into it, and honestly sometimes get the emotional impact. Like sometimes we kind of experience what I would like we get trauma responses. Frankly, sometimes when we as tribal people go into these spaces and we feel like we're getting shut down or we're getting belittled, sometimes that happens to the non-tribal partners also, when they're going to their bosses and they're trying to advocate for this kind of stuff. And so they also are having that human response. And I always remind myself to have empathy when entering these kinds of spaces, when you have a partner that you trust, because they're also feeling that frustration and want to do right by you, but they're sometimes up against forces that are bigger than them. So I just call that out and just try to stay rooted in like that humanity. And I find that it helps open people up to having that growth mindset. That's just my approach. Some tribes are a lot more litigious. Sometimes tribes are like, no, this is how it is, and we'll sue you if you step out of line. And it's like more of that hard line approach. It's just not the approach that myself and my tribe has. Yeah, every tribe has its own kind of vibe. You saw, I gotta wrap this up because we only have 1 more minute, but there's reflection prompts, there's assessment questions that are there if you want to go home and think about this in your dreams. Take it back to your tribes, take it back to your communities, try it out, and think about how this can be used as a strategic planning tool. I was telling people that we worked on this with tribes, and they'll like add arms. So they'll revise it. It's a living document. That's great. That's a part of being a scholar, right? Is taking things that exist, trying them out, and then adjusting them to make them better. I'm happy with that. Share with me if you have an idea. Someone added like time. My tribe added time, thinking about tribal resources. How much time is this taking of us? Which I think is a really great way to think about this. But there might be some other arms that you have. So like I said, shoot me an email or reach out to us over social media or whatever if you want to stay in touch, and we can make some adjustments. On our website, we have a whole guide for how to use this. So if you know people who you think could benefit from this, you could send them the guide. There's a video and all of that. And that's where we're going to wrap it up for the day. Remember that I mentioned that leadership program is open today. You can scan this and just go onto the website and find the application and fill it out, and you should join us. It's really fun. It's a way to really build community, friends, network. It's really good if you want a career in tribal relations, because you're going to be with a bunch of people who are already doing it. So hope to see you there, and stay in touch, like I said. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much.